If you are hunting for a specific Pokemon, let's say Dratini, how likely is Dratini to spawn in a given area and at a given strength or drowsy power? Is it better to always maximize your drowsy power if you're hunting for a specific Pokemon? Or is there an argument for you to actually minimize your drowsy power? But let's go through some basic concepts first. And for the majority of this video, we'll be using Dratini as an example, but you can actually use any Pokemon and do the same thing to understand how likely that Pokemon is to spawn. If you go to Dratini's information, you'll be able to find the unlocking requirements for each of its sleep styles. 1-star sleep style requires basic 1 at Lakeside and 570,000 drowsy power. 2-star sleep style requires basic 3 and 12 million drowsy power, etc, etc. Now these numbers are set, they don't change. Unless that Pokemon can also spawn in a different area, then what can change is the tier, the Snorlax tier. But just by having those requirements met doesn't mean you're guaranteed to see a Dratini. Because, for example, you might have 570,000 drowsy power, but there are 3 Pokemon that needs to spawn. Because the minimum number of spawns for any sleep session is 3, and at 570,000 drowsy power, it is still within the 3 spawn count drowsy power. So let's say you've got 570,000 drowsy power and you've got 3 Pokemon on the field. It's extremely unlikely that you'll get 1 Dratini because all 3 Pokemon added together cannot exceed 570,000 drowsy power in simple terms. Sometimes it does, but that's to do with extremes of examples. Regardless, what you want to do is you want to be above this drowsy power in order to encounter 1-star Dratini sleep style. So let's say you have 1 million drowsy power, then you have a chance at getting Dratini, and then the remaining 430,000 can be split between the other 2 spawns. Now that is the most basic concept you need to even begin to understand the sleep style probability of its spawning. If you don't understand this, I recommend watching this first part again or go to one of my previous drowsy power requirement videos explaining this concept in more depth. The second thing you should understand is that when your drowsy power gets used for spawning those 3 Pokemon, the first 2 will be randomly rolled with all Pokemon having an approximately equal chance of spawning. Now I say Pokemon in simple terms, but what I mean is sleep style. Each sleep style that you've unlocked has about an equal chance to spawn. But the last spawn, no matter how many spawns you can get, for it could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, the last spawn will always try to use what's left of your drowsy power. This concept was also explained in one of my other videos, so if you don't understand this part, I recommend that you watch that one as well. And the third basic concept is as your drowsy power goes up, so I did mention that if you have a higher drowsy power, well, your chance of seeing Dratini should increase because you have more drowsy power to use, and perhaps you can encounter 3 1-star Dratini if you have 1.7 million drowsy power to cover for the drowsy power requirement of all 3 Dratini. But unfortunately, the problem of increasing drowsy power is that other Pokemon's sleep styles also get unlocked. So there is a competing factor here where as you increase the drowsy power, you have more chance to encounter more Dratini, but you also have more chance to encounter more other Pokemon. And at the end of the day, you can only get anywhere between 3 to 8 spawns. And of course, I'm ignoring good camp ticket spawn and incense spawn, otherwise you could get 10. But just to keep the situation as simple as possible, we're going to ignore those 2 factors. And the fourth basic concept you need is that as your spawn count increases, and I mean this thing here, so as your drowsy power breaches 3 million, you will then get 4 spawns, or 7 million, and this is at Lakeside, you will then get 5 spawns, and in order to obtain 8 spawns, so the maximum number of spawns at Lakeside, you need 68, 69 million drowsy power. Now, as you unlock more slots that your Pokemon can spawn or your sleep styles can spawn, of course, that also then increases your chance of Dratini spawning. But that's because all Pokemon have an increased chance of spawning since you've got more spots for them to show up. Which leads me to this part of the RainsAndX calculator, the Pokemon spawn. There's 3 tabs here: Appearance Maximizer, Pokemon Sniper, and Sleep Style Sniper. All 3 require the premium subscription in order to use. Now, for those of you who can't access this part of the calculator, I hope that this video can still shed some light on how this actually works and give you an understanding of the pros and cons of maximizing your drowsy power. But if you need to know exactly the best drowsy power in order to hunt a specific Pokemon, you will need to get the premium subscription for RainsAndX. Thankfully, in this video, I will be using Dratini as an example, so you will see the optimum drowsy power in order to encounter Dratini. Now, just for simplicity, I'm going to focus solely on the Pokemon Sniper tab, because that's the one that I find most people need. It's the one that tells you what drowsy power you should aim to have in order to maximize your chance to see a specific Pokemon. But if you are curious, the difference is for Appearance Maximizer, you simply give the calculator your drowsy power and it will tell you all possible spawns of Pokemon and their probabilities of spawning. For Pokemon Sniper, it tells you for the Pokemon that you want, what drowsy power would be most efficient at that. As for Sleep Style Sniper, it's the same thing, but for a specific sleep style. So for example, if you're missing 3-star sleep style for a Pokemon, you could use Sleep Style Sniper instead of the Pokemon Sniper. The reason why Pokemon Sniper is probably more often used is because I find that more people worry about catching good Pokemon than worry about completing their sleep style decks. Now, just because you have this premium subscription doesn't mean you understand this part of the calculator very well. In fact, it took me a few days to get my head around how this actually works. Well, the way to use Pokemon Sniper is first select the Pokemon that you're hunting for, and then choose a range of drowsy power that you want to assess the probability of finding it. Choose a narrow range, and I would start with 0, especially on your first few times trying this calculator, because we all start with 0 Snorlax strength. We can't all get 5 million Snorlax strength, which is 500 million drowsy power if you got 100 sleep score. So up here is unrealistic amounts anyway. And problem is, if your range between min and max is too large, it can take a while to do the calculations. So I recommend that you choose a lower Snorlax strength, something like maybe 1 million, in order to have faster calculations, at least to understand how this calculator works. And in terms of count, what this one is how many calculations you want this calculator to make between min and max. And I would suggest that you just have as much as possible. Of course, the more you have, the longer it can take to do your calculations. So I'm going with 0 to 1 million strength, and I'm going with 500 counts. That should give me a pretty smooth graph because there's going to be 500 data points between the min and max Snorlax strength that I'm calculating. Now I'm going to remove dual sleep to keep things simple, and I'm going to leave it at 100 sleep score. Now what this means is if you have, let's say, a good sleep day, that's times 4 of your drowsy power, then you click 400, but otherwise click 100. Basically, I'm doing a non-event, non-good sleep day, single session to understand how drowsy power works. Don't worry too much about sleep style rate changer. That's more to do with when specific events happen. For example, when you have a greater appearance rate during good sleep day, then Clefairy line gets a boosted rate, so you can turn those on for a greater appearance rate. Much greater appearance rate is something like the actual full moon day. They have a much greater appearance rate of spawning, so you can turn that on, but I usually leave it untouched. This set here is to do with when green grass actually had Dratini, Ralts, and Stuffle for a limited time during an event in the past with the release of Lakeside. So that's checked because we don't want them to spawn at green grass. So don't worry about any of these settings, just leave them untouched. And we're going to do our calculations. And you can see that it goes pretty quick. Now it does use your computer to do these calculations. So if you've got a pretty slow computer, I'm not sure how quick the calculations will work. And if you find that it's taking forever, reduce the count or reduce the range between min and max. Now very quickly, you can already see a waveform happening relating to how likely Dratini as a Pokemon is to spawn. And when I say that, it includes 1, 2, 3, or 4 star sleep styles. And even as it increases the number of iterations that it checks between 0 and 1 million, this form isn't changing that much. We're already getting a pretty good understanding of how likely Dratini is to spawn along the different drowsy powers at the bottom here on the x-axis. Now, because I'm pretty happy with the waveform now, it's getting pretty smooth, doesn't look like it's changing very much, I'm going to terminate it. I could have gone for 300 or 250 count instead of 500. You can see the actual numbers at the bottom here, and it actually highlights at which Snorlax strength, and if you multiply that by 100, then it's the drowsy power, that Dratini is most likely to spawn. Basically, we are expecting about 0.9 of a Dratini spawning if your Snorlax is kept at 14,000 strength. So that means that every 10 sessions that you do with that Snorlax strength, 9 of them will have Dratini, which would be pretty good. But of course, you have to remember that Dratini spawns as a dozing type. So if you've got slumbering or snoozing, well, this goes out the window. You're trying to force another Pokemon to spawn instead. And what's most interesting is that it's very low drowsy power or Snorlax strength. That is when you're most likely to see a Dratini. And as we increase our Snorlax strength, it seems to hover between 0.3 to 0.5 chance of seeing a Dratini. And sometimes when you increase the strength or drowsy power too much, it just goes down. And it makes sense. Whenever it's going down, it's because other Pokemon are getting unlocked and thereby competing for the spot that Dratini could be spawning at. So what are these peaks that we're looking at? So why is it that it goes up here, it goes up here, it goes up here? Why are there double peaks here? So let's start with 0 Snorlax strength. Well, of course, with 0 strength, you can't see a Dratini because Dratini has a minimum requirement of 570,000 drowsy power. And even as we increase our Snorlax strength to about 4,000, which is equivalent to 400,000 drowsy power because we multiply by the sleep score 100, we still can't see Dratini. We need 570,000 drowsy power, which is why when we hit 6.2 thousand Snorlax strength, which is now equivalent to about 628,000 drowsy power, now we have a chance to see Dratini. Not a very high chance because remember, other Pokemon uses that drowsy power as well. So if another Pokemon spawns instead of Dratini that uses a lot of the drowsy power, then it reduces the chance of Dratini to spawn. And as we go up and we peak at about 14,000 Snorlax strength, 146,000 drowsy power, out of the 3 Pokemon, we get a 0.93 chance of seeing Dratini in one of the 3 slots. And that number is approximately triple that of Dratini 1-star sleep style drowsy power requirement. Because what happens is if your first 2 rolls, your first 2 spawns take up a certain amount of drowsy power and you're left with say 600,000 drowsy power, then it almost guarantees that Dratini will spawn. Because remember, the last roll always chooses what has the highest drowsy power requirement using what drowsy power you have left. So let's take Bulbasaur's 1-star sleep style, 418. Let's say you happen to roll 2 Bulbasaurs that's taken up 800,000 drowsy power. Then your drowsy power needs to be about 1.4 million because the remaining of the 1.4, take away the 2 Bulbasaur, is about 600, leaving you with just enough to guarantee the Dratini. Of course, your first 2 spawns may not necessarily be Bulbasaur, but you can understand that as you increase the drowsy power, there's going to be both positive and negative effects with making Dratini spawn, because one is we have more drowsy power, therefore more drowsy power to use in order to spawn Dratini, but at the same time, with higher drowsy power, there's other Pokemon that can spawn as well, which is why this chart is so jagged. It goes up and down because at any point in time, as you increase that drowsy power or Snorlax strength, the effect could be positive or it could be negative on the chance of seeing Dratini. Now, at this point, I would like to take a side note to talk about something that I've never talked about before, but it has been done by a small number of people in the community. It's been previously referred to as zero drowsy power strategy or minimizing drowsy power strategy. I'm not sure if there's one term for it, but what sometimes people do in order to make sure they get the Pokemon that they want, for example Dratini, is that for the entire week, they keep their Snorlax at about this strength. Of course, if you were doing 2 sessions, you would have to double this and you do 50-50 split, but let's just keep it simple for now. Let's say you're only doing 1 session a day, then you will want 14,000 Snorlax strength for the entire week. So then what they do is they remove all their team members except for one, because you have to have at least 1 Pokemon on the field, but they never feed Snorlax after reaching their ideal Snorlax strength. And the way to not feed Snorlax is to go into your edit teams and then constantly swap out that 1 Pokemon that you have on the field. So all the berries and ingredients get deleted and they never get fed. You gotta make sure that the Pokemon has large inventory as well so that it doesn't hit sneaky snacking too soon, especially when it's overnight. And you need to avoid healing that Pokemon. You wanna run it at 0 energy because you don't want it to be farming fast. You want it to be farming as slow as possible to avoid again sneaky snacking and producing berries for Snorlax. Now, I must say that this is actually very harmful to your resources because you will have very little dream shards, very little candies for that week. But it is a strategy to hunt specifically for what you need. Is it worth that sacrifice? Well, that's up to you to decide. And a side note to this side note is that another good strategy is to run a large inventory Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon. Now, I'm personally not a big fan of Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon. I don't really think they're generally worth investing, but this is one of the niche scenarios where Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon is only beneficial, because normally you want to maximize your drowsy power to get lots of Dream Shards from your sleep research and from your Snorlax tier ranking up. But in this strategy, you can't do that. So what you do is, since you're not raising Snorlax anyway, it doesn't matter if your Pokemon isn't contributing to the Snorlax power. For example, a skill specialist dedicated to Dream Shard Magnet. So you've got a main skill level 7 Swalot that has a large inventory. This is the ideal time to use it. Of course, the counterpoint is you're actually just trying to offset the amount of Dream Shards that you're losing from minimizing your drowsy power for this week. Alright, so back to this chart. So what are these peaks related to? Why is it that at certain Snorlax strength, Dratini is more likely to spawn than others? Well, 2 things I already mentioned. One is spawn count. When your spawn count increases, all Pokemon have a higher chance to be encountered, and that includes Dratini. Let's go back and take a look at the document relating to spawn counts. We've got 3 million, 7 million, 16 million, 30 million, 68 million. So if we take a look at the chart for the respective Snorlax strength, so coming back to this chart here, at 31,000 Snorlax strength, we should see a peak, and we do. You can see that at 31,000 Snorlax strength, we get a peak there, because that equates to having 1 extra spawn. Then at 70,000 Snorlax strength, let's have a look, we get another peak. So it's 77,000 Snorlax strength, so somewhere between these 2 numbers here, 75 to 81, that you get another peak. Then at 160,000 Snorlax strength, which is here, yeah, you can see another peak there. 159, and then there's a 166 peak. Yep, 166,000 peak right there. And then at 300,000 Snorlax strength, once again, this is a clear one. It's not clouded by any other changes. You can see at 300,000, we get another peak that equates to an extra spawn. And then for 8 spawns, we can see at 686,000 Snorlax strength, you can see it's gone up again. So each time there's an extra spawn, the chance of seeing all Pokemon increases. But otherwise, generally speaking, for Dratini, it would go down because other things are getting unlocked. What about the other peaks that are not because of these extra spawns? Well, that's to do with unlocking more sleep styles for Dratini. Because if you've got 2, 3, or 4 sleep styles of Dratini, then the chance of Dratini spawning multiplies by 2, 3, or 4. Assuming, of course, that you have enough drowsy power. So at Lapis Lakeside, Dratini 2-star is unlocked at Basic 3. The Basic 3 requirement is 29 to 30,000 Snorlax strength. Unlocking Basic 3 alone is not enough to unlock Dratini 2-star, because if we multiply that by 100, that's 3 million drowsy power. You need 12 million in order to encounter Dratini. So unlocking Basic 3 alone is not enough. So whether you unlock the tier first or the drowsy power requirement first affects when the peak happens. So this peak is largely to do with the spawn count, because the strength itself is not even enough to give you Dratini 2-star. We need more drowsy power in order to get 2-star Dratini. 2-star Dratini at least needs a strength of about 120,000, which is around here. But remember, just because you have 120,000 doesn't mean you'll get Dratini, because there's other spawns that will take up that drowsy power. But it could explain a few of these minor peaks coming up. This next peak here is to do with the extra spawn count. Now for 3-star and 4-star Dratini, we're looking at Grade 4 and Ultra 1. Grade 4 unlocks at 219,000 Snorlax strength, which is about the same as the drowsy power requirement for Dratini. So we should see a peak for Dratini to spawn at around 219,000, maybe a little bit more. So let's take a look at 219, so 203, 211 here, 220. You can see a minor peak about to happen there. So you can see another little peak because of an extra Dratini sleep style being unlocked. For Ultra 1's Dratini, 4-star is 328,000 Snorlax strength, which is more than enough with 100 sleep score to cover the drowsy power requirements. So let's take a look at 328,000. I think we're going to see a peak there as well. 328,000. 324, 331. You can see again, there is a peak relating to an extra sleep style. And it seems to maintain that peak quite well, possibly because there's not a lot of competing sleep styles. Until eventually it does go down. Of course, it goes up again with an extra spawn. Now with 1 million strength, we do unlock all of the Dratini sleep styles. So does it continue to just keep dropping? Let's take a look. So let's say we start with a minimum of 1 million Snorlax strength this time and go to 3 million, and we'll do 250 counts in between. Let's have a look and see if the chart just continues to go down the whole time. Now remember, with a larger range, you do have a longer calculation time. So then I reduce the count in order to help reduce the amount of time it takes to see the chart. Okay, so you can see now I haven't completed the calculations. You can see I've only done about 50 counts, but basically you can see it's just a general reducing chance to see Dratini, because as you get bigger and bigger drowsy power, no more Dratini sleep styles come up and there's no more extra spawn counts. All that's happening is other sleep styles get unlocked, maybe 3-star Dragonite or 2-star Dragonair, diluting the chance of you encountering Dratini. Now if you're thinking, when you want Dratini, you don't want the drowsy power, don't worry too much, because what you can do is you can split your drowsy power. Don't forget that you can do a short nap session to minimize your drowsy power for the session, and then have a long session for your resources, for example. Of course, then you have to think about how you make your nap session the one that's dozing, and then you can look at making the long session slumbering or snoozing to balance the number of dozing that you get so that the nap will more likely to be dozing. Now, if you decide to do something like that, what I recommend you try to do next is activate dual sleep, because that can actually tell you how to split your session. If you do turn on dual sleep, you will get a lot more calculations because it needs to calculate the different types of sleep scores that you can get. So then it extends this calculation by a lot. So what I recommend, once again, reducing your count or minimizing the range for the calculation, at least for the first few attempts. But what you can see when you do this dual sleep calculation is that, well, basically the same as what we saw with the 100 sleep score at about 14,000 Snorlax strength, but you multiply that by 2, 29,000 Snorlax strength, and then you split the session to approximately 50-50. So 50 sleep score for your nap, 50 sleep score for your long sleep. You will again have the highest chance of seeing Dratini. In fact, this chance is 0.9 times 2. Because you got 2 sessions. And that makes a lot of sense because previously we were talking about 7 sessions in a week, but now we're talking about 14 sessions in a week. Of course, I'm still assuming that you can hit dozing every single time. So this all sounds good on paper, but if you can't achieve dozing every single time for Dratini, this doesn't actually work. So maybe you should still go back to 1 short session for dozing and then 1 long session for your regular sleep that is either snoozing or slumbering. Just make sure that short session is a very low drowsy power, but not too low because then you have no chance of seeing Dratini up here. You can also click on this little icon here. It'll give you the expected count or the probability of seeing Dratini for the nap session. So as you increase the sleep score of your nap session, you will see that it goes up to 50% sleep score here. There's a very high chance of getting Dratini if you have this specific sleep score and this specific Snorlax strength. I honestly don't think it's that important unless you're doing the minimum drowsy power strategy, but I hope that this video explains why sometimes towards the end of the week you're just not seeing any Dratini at all. Now, if you choose a Pokemon that can appear in multiple areas, then it will show you 3 different lines because there are 3 different areas for Squirtle to appear, but otherwise it's the same thing. Although what you can see is that overall, even though Squirtle can spawn at Lakeside and Cyan Beach, overall it has a higher chance to spawn at Cyan Beach than Lakeside. You can see on this chart here, there's a 0.59 expected count of Squirtle based on these settings, whereas there's a 0.45 chance of seeing Squirtle at Lakeside based on these settings. And of course, one of the reasons why Greengrass has a lower rate to spawn Squirtle is because there are just way too many sleep styles that appear at Greengrass. Only half the chance to see Squirtle compared to Cyan Beach. And it's actually very easy to see how many sleep styles are in each area and why it's diluting your Squirtles or your Dratini. This is Lapis Lakeside. Now I'm not actually going to count every single sleep style, so I'm just going to scroll down and see how many scrolls I need to do in order to get to the bottom of this page. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, about 3.5 scrolls to get through all of the sleep styles. Let's head over to Cyan Beach. By the way, this is Cerebi.net, and we're going to check out how many scrolls I need to get to the bottom of the page. 1, 2, 3, 3.5 as well. But for Greengrass, take a look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5. So you can understand that because of the abundance of sleep styles that spawn at Greengrass, everything gets diluted. I know that wasn't very mathematical, but I hope it makes sense. Now, because that was such an overload of information, it may take some time for you to understand. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments section below. And in the next video, we're going to talk about this next topic: what happens when you have an event that causes a Pokemon to have a boosted spawn. In fact, there are 3 different types of boosts. For Good Sleep Day, the actual night of the full moon, it's called a much greater appearance rate, which is the highest level of boost to that Pokemon to spawn. Then there's greater appearance rate, and there is actually a third possibility, which is a slightly greater appearance rate, which is the lowest of the 3 appearance rate boosts. So shout out to RainsAndX for making such a powerful tool for the community in order to use. So consider subscribing for the premium subscription to get access to these tools, but also it'd be nice to just remove all the ads on the calculator anyway. Don't forget you can support me as well by becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button. And you'll get access to my personal opinion on your Pokemon if you want to submit your screenshot over on our Discord channel. Thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to leave a like if this video helped you and subscribe if it didn't.